One of my Rotary mates calls me an accidental politician, and that's really because I started in elections in 1993 working for Sam Reed in the auditor's office as the elections supervisor, and to get to that career progression, the next step was to run for county auditor. And so in 2000, when Sam became Secretary of State, that opportunity presented itself, and I went for the appointment and was elected 4 times after that. So served as a county auditor for about 12 years. And then in, of course, 2011, when he decided to retire, made the decision to try to do it again and follow him one more time. So so I've served at, my background, I guess, is elections. And as one of the things I share with ed boards is I had a real defining moment early in my life when my husband and I lived in Germany. He was in the Army, and we didn't get our absentee ballots until the day after an election. And that really changes your opinion on something you kind of take for granted, I think, because you just always get to vote, and if you don't vote, it's your own choice. And so when I became election supervisor, I made a commitment that I would make sure that I protected the voting rights of everyone in my charge, and I've done that every day since for those 23 years. So that's really my background and my I treated elections as a profession and become state and nationally certified because I really wanted to make sure that Washington State and the counties that I oversaw, we're the best in the country, and I'm really proud of the track record. I'm sure you heard different things yesterday, but our state is a leader in voter registration and elections, and that's really demonstrated not only by the literally hundreds of panels and work groups and speeches that I've been invited to give across the country and across the state, but just by the things that my staff and I get invited to be part of. For example, we've been working on a project for the last couple of years to expand military and overseas voting and improve it across the country. I think Washington, again, is a leader in how we approach our military overseas voters, and I've been on a work group, trying to think what the name of it is, but anyway, work group with the Council of State Governments and the Federal Voting Assistance Program, and we came up with recommendations for states to better serve their military and overseas voters, and a lot of those recommendations are being implemented this year, which is exciting. Since
just to clarify, is the project to use our experience to help others, or yes, to improve our own?
Both. I mean, it certainly, you're always looking at your own state to make sure that you're doing those things. But
what is the turnout like among military voters who are stationed elsewhere?
You asked me something really tough. I have no idea off the top of my head, but I can look that up.
How about this? Is it higher than the rest of the population?
It's I think it is. It's right about the same, possibly a little lower. The biggest challenge we have.
So it's the same kind of challenge.
Yeah.
As with the, okay.
Yeah, and I think the challenge for our state is one of the things we do differently than a lot of states. We let our military overseas voters, once they say they're a military overseas voter, we let them stay on the rolls. Whereas a lot of states after a presidential year will clean those out, or some states is every year, they'll make them re-sign up. And so what that does for our roles, of course, is sometimes you can have folks that don't necessarily return a ballot, and they make our stats worse. But we'd rather just make sure that they're there, and if they decide at the last minute they want to vote, we can take care of them.
So how do you approach that community differently than? Because I'm going to ask the turnout question.
Sure.
Statewide.
Sure.
You talk about there's a project you're working on. How do you look at those overseas voters or military ballots? Is it a different strategy to kind of
it's slightly different. Well, first of all, there's federal requirements that you have to mail out ballots 45 days before. So right now, I think every county in the state has already mailed out, or within the next day or two, will be mailing out their military overseas voters ballots. So, and in our state, it's about 70,000 UOCAVA is what we call them, military overseas voters. So those voters, you have some real barriers and real challenges. I mean, we have missionaries in the middle of Africa who have no access to reliable postal service, to obviously service members in Iraq or Afghanistan. So you have these very, very difficult challenges just to physically get a ballot to them, have them vote it, and get it back. So we, one of the things I'm proud of is back in the mid-90s when I first became in the elections field, we got a new system, and we had the ability to flag email addresses as military people. So we started an email ballot program for our military overseas voters in Thurston County. That was about '96, and now that's actually in federal law that you have to have this component of being able to send a ballot to a military overseas voter by electronic means, either fax, which no one uses those anymore, or by email. So it's those kind of innovations that I think we really use.
How does the email response? How does the email change the response rate of the? Does it help?
It helps. I mean, it helps. We kind of look at it as a fail-safe. So,
It seems like it's an easier way to do it, in my.
Well, it is, and I'll come back to that because there's certainly talk of expanding it to all voters, and that we have to be more cautious of. But you have this group of people who have a physical barrier to getting the chance to vote, and so now you can increase the number of travel days they have by sending them a ballot by email. Now, of course, they obviously have to have a connection to the internet. They have to be able to download that email ballot and mark it and send it back.
Oh, so they still have to send the physical ballot back?
Not, there's a provision in state law, we got changed a couple of years ago, where the exception is our military overseas voters can return it electronically too.
Oh.
Now, with that said, what I'll tell you is the vast majority, it's like 96% of all the ballots that are returned, the voter still returns a hard copy to us too. But this is a fail-safe, so if you have somebody who they just physically can't get it back in time, and our state actually has more than 45 days of transit time, because as you know, and much to the chagrin of newspapers, you have the ballots that come back after Election Day. As long as we get a military overseas ballot by certification, which is 25 days later, we've changed it, so it's not ingrained. I think it's 21 days. We can still count that ballot. So our military overseas voters almost have a 60-day voting window, which is really nice.
Do you send out reminders?
Do we send out reminders? We do. I mean, yes. We don't send out text reminders. We're working on that. We've had some challenges. You have to have people opt in, and we have to get the system in place. But we're working on that. But we do. We're working a constant partnership with the county auditors, of course, doing our voter pamphlets, doing online reminders on web pages, and obviously working with the media and getting news releases out and things. So kind of the traditional ways, and we're certainly Facebook and Twitter. We're always sending out reminders on those channels as well. So
So you do tweet, and then you also, do you send anything email? Overseas, military overseas?
Yes, to our military overseas. Again, that's more at the county level, but the counties are doing that and communicating with their voters too. Okay. Sure, you kind of do that just to keep the email addresses up to date too, to make sure that they're still current and all.
My oldest son is an expatriate in Singapore. He's been there for some time, and the first time, this was 10, 12 years, he didn't get his ballot. And he was upset about that, but now the system has improved, like you say. And I use Singapore as an example because sometimes it can take 2 or 3 weeks before you can get mail, even though it's all air mail. It gets delayed for a lot of different reasons.
Absolutely.
So that's very important.
It is. And so one of I know that in previous interviews my opponent has hit me on expanding this program to more people, or getting rid of it entirely, because if it can't be for everybody, it's not fair. The challenges with email have more to do with security, and that's the thing that we've had a lot of experts look at it and go, yeah, you probably don't want to be doing all your ballots by email just yet, because it's not a secure transmission service, and we don't want either a denial of service attack where you have people cranking on our servers and shutting it down, or you don't want to have people being able to hack into a PDF of your ballot and changing it, or maybe disrupting it so it can't be read. So right now, every voter could download a ballot. Let's say you find yourself in Seattle on Election Day and you realize, oh my gosh, I didn't vote. You can actually either go into the elections office, or you can download a ballot and print it and fill it out. You can even return it by email, and it kind of puts that placeholder in, but you still as a voter have to return that physical ballot for it to be counted, and that's the only difference.
So you don't have to get the ballot through, from the state?
No, you get it from the county, and we have a program called My Ballot, and this would allow, like I said, any county to use this service, and most of the counties do, or any voter can use it, and you can, like I said, download your specific ballot, print that out, fill it out. You can scan it and return it to the county auditor, but then what ends up happening? You need a
backup.
Yeah, you still have to have that paper one come through, which is a good safeguard. The auditors and I have had a lot of discussions about this, because for me, all of the things we do are a giant audit trail. So, you know, I'm assuming all of you were here in 2004, but we had a very close governor's race in 2004, and people lost confidence in our election system because a lot of the things that were not done as well as they could have been came to light. We can't afford that. I can't afford to
Was that
lose.
Christine Gregoire?
Gregoire Rossi, yes,
Oh, I
yes.
remember that.
Yeah, most people do.
Yeah.
And the only thing I think, I've talked to a lot of rooms in the years since, the only thing the whole state can agree on is half the people in the state believe that Gregoire is elected and half the people in the state believe she wasn't. And you will never convince either side otherwise, and that's a problem. I mean, you know, our job really is to make sure every person on that spectrum, from the most, you know, progressive liberal D to the most conservative staunch R, believe the results that are produced are the way people voted, and they
Isn't
reflect
it
that.
complicated, Kim, by the fact that you have different counties?
Absolutely.
And they're beholden to themselves first, and they're trying to do what they think is right, and
Absolutely.
it isn't right sometimes.
Well, one of the things we've worked on very purposefully in the last 12 years is trying to standardize those 39 counties. And that's part of what my office does. I'm sure you heard yesterday that we need to do an audit of all 39 counties. Well, interestingly, we do a review of all 39 counties now. That happens in my certification and training program. And we go in and we're looking at a whole myriad of things. We're looking to make sure that the county's complying with state and federal law. And believe me, there are many, many layers to both of those. That
Is
all
a review the same as an audit?
No, it is not. And that's by design. When we started doing this program back in 1993, I was in the elections office at the time, and one of the concerns the county auditors had was, one, this could be used against me politically. You know,
What?
you get a Secretary of
Oh,
State.
an audit?
Yeah.
Oh,
You know,
I
you have a
see.
Secretary of State who is partisan, and they come in and they have a partisan slant and want to make certain counties look bad. They could certainly do that. So when it was drafted and conceived, it was very purposefully a review. And the idea was, one, you would go in and make sure you have some compliance and that their policies and procedures were lining up with state law, and have that ability to call it out when it's not. I will tell you that, you know, we have a county that we have given multiple kind of warnings to over the years and said, you know, you need to correct these things. And this last review that we released was very critical of the county, and I can tell you the auditor was not happy with me, but you know, in the interest of making sure that every ballot in the state is counted the same, it's very important. So,
But what do you do if that's the case? It seems like you should have stronger.
well, we
Than
did.
just-
Well, the review was pretty powerful. So this is a smaller county in eastern Washington, and I can tell you that their media zeroed in on that review and really, and they had a couple things go wrong in elections, which probably didn't help too. So it became a very public thing, and now I think they're getting the resources they need to do their job from the county commissioners, which is a problem for some of the smaller counties. They are working to, you know, really be transparent with their local media and with the public, and I think that their general election will be much better as a result. So the system does work really well. It also allows us to show counties best practices. You know, if we've got one county that's doing something really innovative, we can share that with all 39 and make sure that all the counties are you know, improving their service delivery. And at the end of the day, to your earlier point, these are independently elected auditors and elections directors who are accountable to their voters. And I think that's one of the best things that has happened since 2004 is King County is now an elected position, whereas back in 2004 it was appointed. And it was really a political appointment. If you look at, and the turnover that happened as a result of that, they had a lot of issues that I think now you have an elected elections director that's accountable to her voters, and I think that's a very different that's a different experience going in and asking for money from the county council when you're doing it as an elected official and as peer rather than a department director who reports to the executive.
How have those reviews helped to assist some of the rural counties? You know, you hear so often that Seattle dominates everything, and part of that's population, but part of it is just,
Right.
you know, these are very small offices that don't have a lot of drop boxes and have very spread out communities. What are some of the things that maybe you've learned and shared and been able to address?
Well, like I said, some of it is just best practices, and we give them ideas of how to be more efficient or serve their customers better. A good example will be up in Ponderay County, very small rural county, very strapped for cash, and their courthouse isn't accessible. And yet that was their voting center. Now,
For disabilities.
yes, so yeah, it was an
That
ADA
doesn't even
compliant.
sound legal.
Well, that's part of the challenge. You know, you have this very old courthouse, and they just haven't done the things to update their stairwells or have elevators and that type of thing. So what was nice is we came in and did a review and pointed that out. you have a voting center that you have to allow people to get to, and it has to be accessible. And so through that process, they identified what they needed to do to make it accessible, and then applied for a grant through Help America Vote funds that we had, and we were able to physically upgrade their courthouse to make it accessible and give them an entry that a person in a wheelchair could have gotten into the courthouse, into the vote center. So sometimes it's that type of thing. Sometimes I can tell you that overall it's space issues, and these smaller counties they have no space in their courthouse. And and to be fair to the commissioners in those counties, you're talking about operations that come up four times a year. We have 4 elections a year in the state, and so are you going to give the county auditor a bunch of space that they use 4 times a year?
How involved do you get with the finances of those? Because money is part of it too.
Yeah.
If you have funding, you get resources.
Absolutely.
How much do you scrutinize, hey, you guys, you're really not spending your money wisely, or we could work together better this way?
I always try to
do that?
Yeah, we try to be very collaborative, because again, at the end of the day, for me to even get money, I have to convince 198 legislators and a governor, at least the majority of those, to approve a budget or get funding. That's one of the problems with our voter pamphlet, printed primary voter pamphlet. That was one of the things I wanted to do when I got into office, and I have not been able to convince the legislature that that's a good expenditure of money. So we have an electronic version. We send out, we have it online in the primary and general election. We have a physical one that you'll get delivered to your households, but that's still a battle, and so I fight those battles at the legislative level. County auditors and election directors are doing that at the county
So
level.
you get a lot of counties that don't have voter pamphlets for the local
Yes,
election.
yes,
And I
yes.
think that it's really bad because,
Yes,
people say they don't know the candidates.
right. Yeah, oh, it is. It is.
When you talk about, I'm going to ask you for a priority on,
Sure.
on a spending question.
Okay.
And I want to say we talked about this when you came in before, the number of drop boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were here before, it was Seattle was just realizing they had a problem,
Right.
didn't have enough. And
Right.
fortunately, in Kitsap County, I think we've been okay, but that's a cost. Where do you put something like a priority like that? Just adding those, whatever they are, $1,000 boxes. The other one that comes up often is the prepaid ballots.
Right.
That I think it's $1 million or something is what the estimate is.
One estimate, yes.
One estimate. Maybe
Yeah.
what's your estimate, and where do you put things like that on the priority list as far
And
as?
just to expand, I'm very interested in your thoughts and what plans you have for increasing the voter turnout
Sure.
in general.
Okay, you're throwing it.
Yeah, kind of-
Yeah, okay, now I'm
that's a
like, okay, so let's break all of those down. So let's go back to drop boxes. So drop boxes, you have the initial expense to install a drop box somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. That's the easy cost. That's easy. You can get your commissioners to give you 10 new boxes and spend $10,000 and put them in. The cost every election, though, that you're committing to is you gotta open that drop box 18 days before election day. You have to have someone go out, and you have to have 2 people to go out and empty those at least once a day, depending on the area. Some areas you might be able to get, by with less, but that's an actual operation cost that you're now adding. And again, this goes back to that local control and that balance. Part of this is, and this is where my opponent and I are very different in our leadership styles. I know the role the Secretary of State's office should play and what my role is. And my role is to work with the county auditors, but there is a responsibility that those auditors have to their voters that is their responsibility. So those choices that they make about the resources they have are their local control. And again, they answer to their voters. So one of the things I'm proud of is when I left Thurston County, so let me back up. In the early 2000s, we were one of the first counties that did staffed drop sites, because when we started doing vote by mail elections, our biggest complaint was a poll tax, the stamp, and their signatures were visible to their postmen, so postal carriers. What we did is we started staffing drop sites at some key locations around the county. This worked really well. The complaints died out. So it's like, this is great. So we evolved that into permanent drop sites, and so we are the first county to install drop boxes in Washington State. And I'm proud to tell you, when I left Thurston County, we had more drop boxes than any county in the state. We had 24. So for my sphere of influence in Thurston County, that was a high priority for me, and we adjusted the resources to make that happen. Now, as you get out to other counties and bigger counties and even smaller counties, you have different demands on those resources and ability to be able to do those things. So that has to be the auditors making those decisions. And I guarantee you, when they make decisions their community doesn't like, they hear about it. A great example would be Wyman County with WSU. And they were, for years, they were getting hammered to put a drop box in, and the auditor was very resistant for a whole lot of reasons. And then she finally put one in, and it's, of course, their busiest drop box in their county.
But isn't that just exactly the problem? In other words, they might be reluctant to do this for the very reason that they're going to expand voter turnout. Maybe they don't really want the students at WSU to be voting in their local elections.
Yeah, but I think what we've seen is across the state is actually, UW has a permanent drop box now, Central has a permanent drop box, WSU has a permanent drop box, Western has a permanent drop box, Evergreen has a permanent drop box. So it is happening, but again, I think that for the state to come in or to change a law, I know one of the things that Tina's advocating is, changing the law and having so many voters requirement for every, 15,000 voters you have a drop box. And that sounds all well and good, but logistically, how are you going to carry that out? How are you actually going to be able to staff that? How are you going to be able to?
So the difference,
In Clallam County, the League of Women Voters picks up the ballots from the drop boxes and takes them to the auditor.
Yeah, but do they do that as a volunteer, or do they do that as paid staff?
It's, they're paid, but not staff.
Yeah, well, if they're paid, they're considered
But they're
staff.
not, there's no overhead, no benefits, no.
Well, I know that, but I'm saying that, but it's still a cost. It's
Yeah, but
a
it's much
cost.
less.
But all I'm saying, I mean, and like I said, that's a local. In my opinion, that is where there's a local control. Because the flip side of that is, let's say we say for every 20,000 voters you have a drop box. So now all the auditors across the state scramble and they put in drop boxes. So what happens now if they can't actually get enough people to do those pickups? So yes, Klallam County, very doable. King County might be a very different scale. I mean, they're right now, I was just talking, let me switch counties. Pierce County is having trouble getting enough people to come in and work just to process their ballots, because they're anticipating high turnout and they're anticipating having 24-hour shifts. So, I mean, again, these are the resource issues that each county, I think, has to have the local control to make those decisions, and they are going to be answerable to their voters. It's easy to throw all these things out as political attacks. It's easy to be critical of the auditors aren't doing their job, Secretary of State isn't doing their job. Doing the work's hard. And I don't think a solution in Kitsap County fits King County.
What about the prepaid postage?
Prepaid postage. So the biggest challenge with prepaid postage is the post office at a federal level isn't required to do a postmark on a business reply envelope or prepaid postage unless you are actually putting a physical stamp on each one of those return ballots. So for us, that's a problem because, as you know, that's the benchmark we use for whether a ballot's valid or not, is you have to have it postmarked on or before Election Day. So while I know that some counties have been working with their local post offices to try to see if we did prepaid postage or did a business reply, could we have you just postmark it? And I think they're having some mixed success. But that's only their local postmaster. So if somebody drops off a ballot in Spokane County and they're from Kitsap County and it doesn't get the postmark, and worse yet, it doesn't get there by Election Day, that ballot may or may not be counted. So that's why I've been working with Congressman Denny Heck and going to be working with our congressional delegation to see if we could get a federal change to where those would be postmarked, and then we can actually start looking at prepaid postage, and maybe that's at a federal level, maybe it's a state level, but first we have to solve that at that federal level with postal regulations. And I can tell you that every auditor and every election director in the state works with their local post office on these kinds of issues, but it really needs to be up at that top level.
So what I gather from what you're saying is you have a philosophical difference. It's kind of like you believe that it's more local control through the county auditors versus the state establishing more standards.
No, I think it's a partnership. I think it's a partnership. I think that I'm always going to be very cognizant of local control because I came from local government. So, and I know those challenges at the county. I mean, we're hearing right now up in Snohomish County, one of the things is, and you probably heard about this yesterday too, that they're going to have extra postage because their ballot weighs too much to come back at the first class rate. So, so now we're getting gasoline on that fire. You've got council members who are pointing out that that the auditors will always pay the return postage if you as a voter forget to put your stamp on it. And that's great, and there's been some talk about just paying for the postage, like Snohomish County going ahead and paying the return postage. and again, those are things that I think that work best at the local level in those conversations. But they're looking at a 3% budget cut across the board. So those are the tough decisions that have to be made by their council. Are you gonna fund 3 deputies in the sheriff's department? Or are you gonna pay for the postage for return ballots? And that's the thing that I think is appropriately done at the local level.
How much of a discouragement do you think the postage is?
I have not seen it as being a barrier or something that's very difficult for people to come. Significant, right? I mean, like I said, many counties are installing drop boxes, or in Snohomish County, one of the things they're doing is they're going to add mobile drop boxes in the days near the election. And like I said, the counties have an agreement with the post office to pay the postage due when somebody doesn't put their stamp on the ballot. I don't think it's a barrier. And in Thurston County, I can tell you 60% of the ballots are being returned in drop boxes now.
So taking that, I mean, what it sounds like you're saying is the drop boxes is maybe a better solution if the county chooses
Yes,
it, and then
yeah.
they can find ways to get the turnout. So obviously part of that is on the county then to get their numbers up and get people to turn out. So what about your office? Where's your influence and your role in getting those turnout numbers to increase?
Well, I think our role is certainly information, and getting information in voters' hands as much as possible is always a key. Letting them know when a voter registration cutoff date is coming up, letting them know when they need to have their ballot postmarked by, how they return a ballot, how they fill out their ballot. All of those things are critical because you don't want people to not have their ballots counted because of an administrative error on either their part or our part. But with that said, when you take a step back, and this has been fodder since my opponent entered the race, that I am solely responsible for the plummeting participation rates in elections in our state, and I've got an article that the News Tribune at Olympia kind of called that out as manipulating the facts, but. When you look at turnout and you look at it comprehensively over the last 100 years, and you can look nationally, you can look at our state, we have seen a gradual decline in participation rates over that 100-year period. But within that, we have seen a pretty consistent pattern. Highest turnout elections are presidential elections, followed by midterm even year elections, and then the odd year elections are the lowest turnout. And it's ironic because, of course, those are the positions and the people that affect your daily life.
Those are often the local
absolutely.
elections that often don't get those voter pamphlets. So
yes and no. I mean, we have, and it's hit and miss, you're right, across different counties. But in terms of turnout, I don't think there's a difference between a county that has a voter pamphlet and a county that doesn't. But I'll look at that. I don't want to say that without having looked at the data. But that's another thing. I think we can look at some of this through data-driven analysis, not just kind of anecdotal things that I'm doing right now. So we'll go away from that. But that would be one to look at. Is there higher turnout in Thurston County where you have a voter's pamphlet compared to another county that doesn't in a primary? That would definitely be worthwhile looking at. But when you look at these turnout patterns, they really are about what's on the ballot and what type of an election it is. So one of the criticisms that Tina has been making of me is that all 4 years that I've been here, we've had lower turnout than the previous 4 years. Okay, there again, I think there's a number of factors that mitigate that. But you look at, for example, 2010 and 2014. So 2014 had almost 20% turnout less than 2010. Well, in 2010, you had 3 taxation issues on the ballot. You had the soda pop tax increase, you had an income tax, and the 2/3 majority in the legislature for increasing taxes. So that actually motivated people to return a ballot because they thought that their vote was going to make a difference in it. And I think that's, for a lot of voters, the key. If they think that their ballot's going to make a difference, they participate. Or if it's an issue or a candidate that really excites them, they turn in their ballot. I think the second tier, and this we're seeing nationally, I think that the negative campaigning, I think the vitriolic, the candidates in some races, we won't point out specific ones, I think that after a while people get tired of it, and they are tired of hearing 2 people fight, and they just tune out, and they don't participate. So we've been talking.
How does your office counteract? I mean, because it is kind of your charge to counteract that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
what about same-day registration? I mean,
I'll
you're
come back to
saying
that. I'll come back to that. Let me stick with
Registration
voter turnout. I got into elections in 1993, and we were talking in 1993 about all of the barriers to voting. that we need to expand the voting period. We need to have more opportunities for voters to engage. The reason that people aren't voting is because they can't get away from work on election day, so let's expand it. So since 1993, across the country and certainly in our state, we've expanded absentee voting. We have created, what's it called, early voting periods. Some states have early voting. We've already started voting in some states across the country. Our state moved to vote by mail. We have, on and on, layers and layers. We've reduced the cutoff days for voter registration. And what's telling about that period of time, and I've been looking at this pretty critically over the last 5 years, is the voter participation rates really haven't changed. That pattern I talked about hasn't really changed. We had the National Voter Registration Act that Bill Clinton signed into law in 1993, where we stopped purging people every 4 years after a presidential election. It hasn't changed. So I think that it's about information, and I think the more we can get information to voters, the better informed they are and the more likely they are to engage. And I'm not sure that government, the county auditors, the Secretary of State, can really influence or impact turnout, because I think it's more complex than that. I think, to just, my opponent talks about 100% turnout, 100% registration, 100% turnout. That should be the goal. Of course that's the goal. That's been the goal of every election administrator I've ever met in my entire career. But the reality, let's talk about countries that have 100% turnout. I've observed an election in one, it's Russia. When the election night reports came in, it was a governor's year, and we were there in '97. They had precincts that had 105% turnout, and it was like, how does that happen? And they said, oh well, Moscow rewards us for that. Really interesting. And conversely, you look at Australia, where it is required, it is compulsory voting. They have to vote. It's illegal not to vote. They don't get to 100% participation rate.
How about I see this thing differently? Because I think it's similar to a newspaper.
Sure.
We should have 100% readership.
Right.
But
Weird.
No, I want people to have the right to say no. I don't care. What about the concept of better educated voters, people who actually know about it more, because I think that's important too.
Absolutely.
And that's along with our mission.
Right.
Not only do I want people to vote, I want people to know what they're voting about and be informed about it. How are you trying to improve it from that?
That's probably where we put all of our emphasis on. The counties really are the ones that are doing the actual, intake of voter registrations and processing those, and it comes into our main database and we work with them. But, we're always trying to expand that access to information. One example would be this year, and this was a huge risk, we have an app called My Vote, and this is where you as a voter can go in and you can put in some information, and you can get your specific information and it can actually lead you even to your specific ballot with all the candidates and issues for your address and your family. And that app, we found out in December, was not accessible. That's very problematic. So people, for example, who need to use a screen reader couldn't use their screen reader to look through our app. And so we took a big risk in December and went ahead and did an upgrade, which I never do upgrades in presidential years for this reason, because you're potentially opening up a new problem. But we went ahead and did it, and now it's accessible on 3 or 4 screen readers, and it's we worked with our advisory committee, accessibility advisory committee. We're very proud of this. Well, in April, we made that go live because we wanted to have it available for the presidential primary. And Tina's camp was able to go in and they found some development code so essentially you have the website that has the beautiful pictures and all the graphics and things. And the development code is that actual script of running the web page. Well, they were able to get behind our web page and look at that. And they found 4 fields that were in the original coding that was created 10 years ago that allowed them to see phone number, email address, the ballot style that the voter got, and whether they were military or not. Now, after all that came to light, and we actually publicly said thank you, and we've corrected that ability for someone to get in there. Again, this is a real contrast in how we approach the job. Tina chose to say that we have this massive vulnerability in our system. It wasn't. It was breached. It was not breached. You were able to go into individual records and look at this if you knew how to get back there, if you were a hacker or you're a programmer. We did go through our logs. We did not have a breach of that data. They did not have access to the 4.1 million voters that we have in the system. In fact, that system is not even tied to our main voter registration database. We download a copy for this reason, so you wouldn't be able to go in and get to that main database. So we have a lot of security levels built in, both physical and electronic, and all of those things worked. Now she's right, she got us, we had this ability for someone to get in and see that. It's been taken care of, and that's what management is.
But so the app,
So-
I'm assuming the app is intended for young people in part, because that's
For
what they're used
any
to.
voter,
And I
yes.
shouldn't, I'm not trying to
Yeah.
discriminate, but in general, a generation that didn't grow up with paper ballots, and
Yes.
that would be attractive.
Yes, yes.
What are the types of things you're trying to do to get young people, to get maybe disabled people who don't be around, to people who are not native English speakers?
Right.
What are some of the things
Multiple
that you
layers.
inform and educate them?
We, multiple layers. So we have in my elections division, we have an outreach team, and they do things on all of those planes. So we are working with the disabled community, for example, and just making sure the things that we're doing are helping your voters be engaged. So we translate our materials into 17 languages. Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act requires 3. And some of that translation is into Braille, is into audio formats. It really is, in some cases, almost custom making things for a voter's needs. And so we have that flexibility. A couple of the people in that division are bilingual, and they're going out, for example, to Yakima, and they're sitting down with the local community there and saying, are we getting you everything that you need? Is there anything else we could be doing better? And it's a constant dialogue and conversation. One of the things, for example, we found in some Asian communities, it's not a matter of just translating it, it's cultural change. These people came from regimes that they did not really allow the citizens to have a voice. So they're not used to being able to vote. And in fact, kind of don't trust government and think they're not supposed to, because where they came from, you would be punished if you didn't vote the right way, if you got to vote at all. So some of that is just cultural change. Now that you're a citizen, here's what your opportunity is, and here's part of civic engagement. We also do programs K through 12 and college, where we go out into high schools and colleges and talk to young people about why their vote matters and how you engage. And I have one thing I've been doing for about 10 years, and I have so much fun with it, where I tell them that they get to go to a concert, and I have 10% of the room pick the concert that they get to go to, picking 3 polarizing artists. Anyway, long story short, we do this whole exercise where I show them that that's actually what happens in an odd year election. That when you actually look at who's selected for the whole population, it's about 12% of the population.
What about civic education in the high schools? Do
Yes.
you have a role in?
Absolutely. Well, we'd like to. we do as much as we can. We partner certainly with school districts across the state and local auditors and things. But I'm working with a project that started, I believe, in California to up civic engagement in civic education in high schools with Chief Justice Barbara Mattson and a group of concerned lawyers, actually, that are concerned that we're not teaching the next generation about civic engagement. And we're trying to bring that to SPI, and with the new SPI, I'm hoping we can, Superintendent of Public Instruction, sorry, I'm hoping that we can actually up that presence of civic engagement and make that connection for voters. One of the bills that Tina says that I'm against, which isn't true, is 16 and 17-year-old pre-registration. 16 I have trouble with. 17 though, we had a bill last session, and I think I came and chatted with you about it, to allow high school seniors to register to vote, 17 and up, partly because most 17-year-olds are still in high school. And we can get to a big cross-section of them, whereas 16, you're only getting them at that driver's licensing window, and there you're only getting the kids that have means, that can afford driver's training and a license and a car and all that. So
The 17 idea would be like going to the schools.
going to the
and
schools,
saying,
yep,
"Here, here."
and working again with the auditors and really trying to get the funding to have, say a voter registration day, or have 2 voter registration days a senior year, where we're raising that awareness. So that's the first level, get them registered, but then having that follow-on of the civic, getting them to understand why their civic engagement matters. Because what you look at states like Florida and Hawaii, where they have 16, 17-year-old pre-registration, they didn't see an increase in that group when they became old enough to vote if they just registered them. They only saw the increased participation when you had that civic engagement lesson as part of it, when you started explaining to them why their vote mattered, why their voice mattered. So I feel really strongly about that, and we've been doing this stuff.
Kind of, rather than just an automatic, here you get this,
Right.
but going and being more
Right.
connected.
What
Yeah.
about
And
this?
civic education is required now. You're just saying that you're going to.
I just would like to make sure that voting piece is a part of that civic education. And I've heard from many teachers across the state who say, well, we're not doing it as much as we used to, and it's just a budget cut thing, and that's problematic. But that's bigger, K through 12 stuff is we've got a whole lot of layers of things I'm not going to try to own, but I think that piece we definitely need to
What
do.
about that same-day registration?
So same day registration. It sounds good, and you have a handful of states that do it and have higher turnout than us. Minnesota would be the one everybody points to, that they have higher turnout than we do. It's problematic on a couple levels for me, and I've been against it every year that it's been brought to the legislature. The first one is, what problem are we trying to solve? So is it a problem that people aren't registering and they can't vote? And I don't believe it is. So one statistic I'll throw out is in 2012, highest turnout election in our state's history, over 3 million people cast a ballot. We had, and I don't have the number in front of me, so I'm going to go with a higher number, but I think it's actually 1,400. 2,400 people statewide who weren't able to vote because they weren't registered. And that was people who had their ballots.
They wanted to vote, but.
Yeah, so showed up on election day or contacted the county auditor's office and said, I didn't get my ballot, I want to vote. And we had 2,400 people statewide who had their ballots rejected because they weren't registered to vote. So the vast majority of people, one of the strengths of vote by mail is we have an 18-day voting window to deal with issues, whereas we used to have it on election day. So when we had poll sites, all these problems came up and we had about a 16-hour day to solve them all. Now we have 18 days, and that's why you're seeing these low rates of rejection, because we can figure out, oh, you moved from Kitsap to Thurston and you didn't update your registration. So you can't vote in Thurston, but the good news is you can vote in Kitsap County and we'll update your registration after election day. So off the top, I think we're doing a good job there, because that's a very low number. It's still unacceptable. I'd love it to be zero, but people wait to the last minute. Conversely, on the 8-day cutoff, 15,000 people statewide showed up on the 15-day cutoff, or 8-day cutoff. And why that's significant is those people will wait till election day. They're going to wait till the last day. So now what we're going to do with same-day registration is those 15,000 people come in on election day across the state. And now you start putting stress on the system that you see in other states. You see long lines on election day in other states. Why is that? A whole host of reasons I'm not going to get into, but we don't have those here, again, because we have that 18-day voting period. So now you're going to put those 15,000 people on election day. Now county auditors have to register them to vote and issue them a ballot. That's taking resources from counting ballots on election day, which is really where they should be focusing, so you have meaningful election results election night and in the days to follow faster. And now you're putting this extra stress on the system. So if something goes wrong, for example, and this actually happened a couple of years ago on election day, somebody cut a T1 line down in Clark County, and it affected our voter registration system statewide.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it's like a line that has a computer connection. And that was what that was one of the main lines for the states, our system and a bunch of state things. They cut that line and now our system was down. Meaning the counties couldn't ping off the state voter registration database to find out if Kim Wyman was registered or not and all that. So it had some disruption. We were able to deal with it. But you start adding that stress onto the system. Now if something goes wrong, now you start impacting people's ability to cast a ballot.
So right now, it's like 8 days ahead of time?
Yes. Yes.
You have to be registered 8 days.
A new registrant, yes.
What's what's October 10th then?
That's the 28-day cutoff. So that's for people, that's address changes. Those are people that by and large are already registered and they're doing the final, they moved, oh gosh, I didn't update my registration. I
When
need
do
to
the
do
voter
that.
pamphlets go out?
They will go out mid-October. So about 20 days before.
So I
election day.
imagine you find out a lot at that point.
Yes, and that's where we get a lot of contacts.
But you can register up until November 1st.
No.
Is that what
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. But further, in terms of the things that get left out of the discussion, so beyond the mechanical, so I'm going to always go to the mechanical first. But now let's talk about the impact of same-day registration in the states that have it. Did you know Oregon used to be a same-day registration state? They no longer are. Because in the 1980s, you had a religious sect who took over a town. And what they did, and it's creepy, if you read the stories, it's really creepy. They did a whole bunch of things, but one of them was busing people in from Portland and registering them to vote on election day in the small town, and that religious sect was able to take over their city council. Oregon no longer has same-day registration because of what happened there. And a whole lot of other things. They literally went to salad bars and contaminated them and gave people food poisoning. It was a really weird thing, but extreme example, but it's one of the things. And then you look at Minnesota, Minnesota doesn't verify if the people were eligible to vote on election day until after they certify their election. Whereas one of the things we do with that 8-day window is we are actually, you know, checking your driver's license number against Department of Licensing to make sure you're a real person. Now, our 8-day cutoff, to be fair, you have to walk into a county auditor's office or the county elections department to do that. But
You can't do,
you can't do mail-in, you can't do online in that window.
I
So,
think that's-
so
Yeah,
long
there's
story short,
difference.
rather than just focusing on, you know, my opponent keeps cherry picking a couple of ideas and that these would be really innovative. Those ideas she's talking about have been in 4 to 5 sessions. They're not new ideas. They're just kind of good, they're good political talking points. They're not necessarily going to move the needle forward. What I'd like to see is I'd like us to see one single cutoff date. I'd like to move the 8-day date back about 3 days to an 11-day cutoff and move that change cutoff also to 11 days. And there's a whole lot of reasons for this, but the main one is it would be so much cleaner and more understandable for voters.
I think that's true.
You have a single day. If you need to update your registration, do it by this date. If you need to register to vote, do it by this date. You know, one of the things that's really been lost in some of the conversation that my opponent's been using or saying is, you know, our growth in new voters hasn't, you know, in her opinion, hasn't gone up very much. It has, we're actually doing just fine. But, you know, 82% of our eligible voters are registered to vote. I mean, she throws out some inflammatory numbers, but we actually are, I think we're in the top 10 nationally of registered voters. But for every one of those new registrations, we have 4 to 5 name changes, address changes, just movement. I mean, 10% of our population moves every year. And so what is really important for my office and for the county auditors to do is make sure that your address is the most current. So we're sending you the ballot the first time to the right place. You're getting the right issues and right candidates on the ballot. Those are the mechanical things that are easy to gloss over. Oh, that, you know, that's just no big deal. That actually is really important. If you've had, and I don't know if Kitsap's had it, but I know Thurston has, you give 30 voters the wrong ballot, that's a problem. You know, so our job is to make sure we have the most accurate data. And further, that's one of the things I'm proud of. I got to work on a project with the Pew Center in the States called ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. And what this is we created this consortium of now 20 states. And what we're doing is we're comparing our voter registration list, we're data matching it, so that we're catching people that move from one state to another. So we have their most current address and their right registration. And out of this, we've actually found a whole bunch of interstate people within Washington that moved that we didn't pick up through our normal processes. So it's made our list cleaner. But for me, I always balance things with access and security. So we've taken care of some of the accuracy and the security issues. It also allows us to identify people who are in Washington State, may be eligible to vote, and allows us to actually directly contact them. So this program went up in 2012, and since then we have mailed to 1.6 million people, I believe, over 1 million people, just a card. Here's what you need to do to register. Here are the different ways. You know, you can go online right now. It's super easy. We target that sometimes by age group and kind of get feedback, but we've had over 200,000 people who have registered to vote through that program over that period of time. So, you know, it's a constant effort, and I do think that we're close to sort of that saturation level, but we always want to make sure we're giving every opportunity we can. One statistic, for example, 10% of our voters that are registered to vote have never voted. 10%. I don't know why that is.
I mean, they're registered, but they don't
They've
vote,
never
or
they've
they're
never-
just new voters?
No, they've never cast a ballot. And so, you know, we have some voters that have been in the system for decades. And for whatever reason, we have this weird anomaly that 10% just they choose not to participate for whatever reason. So, you know, so like I said, the parts we can control are the accuracy and the security and the access, and that's where we spend our time.
What do you see, and you kind of just answered the question with what you explained, but if you're reelected to this seat over the next 4 years, what kind of technological changes do you envision?
Actually, we got one real big project we're working on and I'm very excited about. We have a voter registration system that we went live with, I think, in 2004, and that's the state voter registration database, and the counties now all feed into it, 2005 actually. So now these systems are 10, 11 years old, and about 2.5 years ago I convened a tech summit, and election directors and auditors from around the state, we sat down, and the first question I asked them was, knowing what you know today, would you build the system we have? And not a single hand went up. Because what's happened is we built this system and then we started adding things. The state added features, my vote, my ballot. We added, the election night reporting system. When I say we, my predecessor, I wasn't the Secretary of State then, but the counties worked with them. And then the counties had different things that they've added. So we have all of these independent kind of systems that all try to do similar things, but each county is kind of a little different. What we wanted to do, and it really took working through this to get all 39 counties to this point, is have a more comprehensive look at it. So we spent literally 2 years identifying and working with a vendor to identify what things are we doing now, what will we like to have the capacity to, like texting voters to give them a reminder that cutoff is coming up or election day is coming up. How do we do that so every county in the state has that same capacity, has that same ability? And we've spent the time, and we're also looking at how are we going to pay for it? So we have this great comprehensive plan. We put an RFI, request for information, out to the private sector and said, here's what we'd like. Can you even build it? And we got responses back, and we know it's possible, which is great. So now we are getting ready to release a request for proposal, RFP. That'll come out this fall. And our goal is to bring the system up next year. We obviously have to go to the legislature for funding. But by doing this in this comprehensive manner, instead of having each of the 39 counties do it and then having the state do it, is we can get some economies of scale that I think are going to make this much more cost effective and much more palatable for not only the counties but for the state. And I'm very optimistic that this is going to be a much more equitable system for every county. So if you're in a small county that is strapped for cash, you're going to have the same ability to reach your voters and serve your voters as King County does, or Snohomish County does, or Kitsap, or whatever. So I'm really excited about this, and I think that it's really going to move our state forward. So that's probably the biggest project. One of the things I know Tina hits me on all the time is that one of my promises was to do the portal for our businesses, shifting gears to corporations and charities. We've been working on an upgrade to our system for the last 2 years. We are ready to turn it on. We have it all kind of worked out, training and all that is done. But we're holding off a little bit because we still want to have that portal with Department of Revenue, Department of Licensing, LNI.
Oh, a portal to register?
Yeah, so 70% of all of the corporations in the state come through the Secretary of State's office first. And so what my thought was 4 years ago is, why don't we give them that roadmap? Because a lot of these businesses are small operations, mom and pop, corporations. How do we let them know that they need to, visit LNI, Department of Revenue, Department of Licensing, or whatever those things are, maybe the city of Poulsbo? How do you connect them with all of the different entities they need to do to meet all the requirements? So that was our grand vision, but you have to make this connectivity with these systems. And so that's kind of the wall that we've hit, is we're working with these entities and their systems aren't ready. And so this is a real contrast in the way that we approach things. My opponent has framed it as this big failure on my part, and that, that those systems are ready and it's not yours. And it's to the point where in one ed board she actually called me a liar, which was really awesome. But I can back that up. I can show you the work product. I can show you the emails that we've done with other entities. And I'm not going to throw under the bus some of these organizations because they're not ready. There's a whole lot of reasons they're not ready, and I understand that. And plus, they report to the governor. They don't report to me, so I don't have that power to say, we're going to make this happen. But we're going to keep working with them because it's about collaboration and it's about working together.
I'm going to bring up one that Tina mentioned, and it was her desire, kind of one of her platform pieces was to look into nonprofit status and make sure. And that was something Sam had always, in your office, puts that list out every year of making sure there's, kind of that consumer protection,
sure,
going to be donating money. Do you share the same kind of need to go through all of that? And
I think my role as Secretary of State is to provide information to all of you as consumers. And, so that's why we do the thing around Christmas time of, these are charities, and here's the information you can get from our office. How much of every dollar you give actually goes to direct service? That's a call you get to make as a charitable giver, but we want you to have information so you can make an informed decision. Charities or corporations, same thing. What's that board of directors? Who's running that corporation that I'm going to do business with? So I think that's the role of the Secretary of State's office. When you get into the enforcement side, that's why we partner with the Attorney General's office in doing that. And if there are violations of state law, if you have bad actors, then the Attorney General can go after those bad actors. I think you have to be, again, careful how you approach that. That's certainly been a topic nationally, with how the IRS went and investigated organizations based on their political leanings and things. So, it's always My job is to instill confidence in everyone, and I think you have to be careful that you don't have the perception of being political. That's something I'm proud of the way that I've operated both at the county level and at the state level now, is I check that partisanship at the door. Yes, I'm a Republican, but once I walk in the door every day, I represent every voter in the state, not just my party. And it, Julie,
You said, I'm sorry, you said that you were state and nationally certified. Is there a certification for?
there is.
For
Election.
Secretary of State? So what?
It's a certified election administrator. So back in the early 90s, a group of folks, it's called the Election Center and Auburn University, really wanted to make elections more professional and make it more like law or accounting or some of these places where you can actually get a certification. And so they created this program that is academic and then also technical and really looking at how you run an election. And so that national certification program, CIRA, Certified Election Administrator, and I can't remember what the A is for, but I guess administrator. And then we have a state program that came out of the 1991, I think it was a congressional or legislative race in this area, it's up on the peninsula at least, where it was a very close election, a lot like Rossi Gregoire, and the winner on election night was different than the person who won. So that was the first time Washington really focused on trying to standardize the counties. So we have a certification and training program in my office where county election officials can go through and they take a really hard test. They have to conduct 2 general elections. And actually work in the field for 2 general elections, so it's at least a 2-year commitment. Plus they have to take training and get some courses. So it's a pretty comprehensive program, and then you have to get recertified every year. So you're ongoing.
But that's not a requirement, is it?
In state law, every county has to have 2 certified election administrators at a minimum.
So Kim, should the position be partisan?
I don't think so. I really believe that this position needs to be above partisan politics.
The more you talk, I mean.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But, the challenge for a state like Washington where you don't register by party is the political parties, both here in our state and at a national level, they like to have a quick summary. So they want to look at Kitsap County. Is Kitsap County a Democratic or a Republican-leaning county? They look at the elected officials. Oh, county commission is all D. Okay, it's a D-leaning county, or the courthouse is D-leaning or R-leaning, and I think they do that at the state level too. And it's a pretty easy, accurate lean. There are 9 statewide officers, and most of us are partisan, and I'm the only Republican. So so I think that's part of why, from a political standpoint, I think that's why it's still partisan. But yeah, why is the county auditor a partisan office in most counties in the state? It shouldn't be.
Primaries.
Yes.
Presidential primary.
Yes.
August primary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What, would you make any changes to
I've
that?
been trying to make changes. Again, I think I came and talked to this board a while ago. So let's break them up kind of in 2 separate things. Presidential primary, back in 2014 when we were doing our legislative session 2015 planning, my staff actually recommended we cancel it. Why don't we just, it's $11 million, that's a lot of money. We're competing with McCleary. And we had a lot of discussion, and I finally came to the conclusion, right now no one's thinking about the presidential race, but by 2016, everybody's going to expect to vote on it. And I think that's our responsibility. And so we had a bill to try to reform it. I think hopefully you'll remember, I wanted to move it to March to make it more meaningful in the calendar. I wanted to encourage the parties to at least allocate some of their delegates to the results of the presidential primary instead of just caucus. And those were really the 2 big platforms. And I went to Ed boards and I talked about it, and I really talked about how I wanted the parties to make this more meaningful, and that I would advocate to cancel it. Well, what happened along the way is I started talking to people across the state. I realized I'm wasting my time trying to make the parties do something, because they're constitutionally protected entities. They can do what they want. Make it meaningful for the voters. And then the parties can choose to do with those results what they want. And that's exactly how 16 played out. So you look at, we had a May primary. I tried to move it not only in statute earlier, but we had a commission.
I think, weren't you talking about a regional? Some sort of a
yes.
northwest?
Yeah.
So you're for the presidential primary?
Absolutely.
Okay, you want to keep that?
I want to keep that, but let me just close on a couple more things about it. We tried to get the parties to move it earlier, because I could convene a meeting. We did that. Democratic Party, trade down party lines, they wouldn't move it. So we had it in May. 1.4 million people showed up. my opponent called for me to cancel that primary the week ballots were going out to military overseas voters. And her whole thing was it was meaningless and it didn't do anything, it just benefited one party. Well, that wasn't true. When you look at it, caucuses, we had less than 300,000 people statewide in both parties who showed up at the caucuses. And I will add that they were kind of a mess, because it was too much volume for the parties to handle. People showed up and voted when we already knew who the two candidates were going to be in both parties. Had we had that in March, we would have been over 2 million. So it's an interesting paradox, and my opponent on one hand is saying how important turnout is and she's going to fight for it, and she wanted to cancel it because she didn't think it was meaningful. You know, I think that you have to have a Secretary of State who is there for the voters and not for the political parties. This is not a partisan issue. And what we saw is that the Republican Party had a rule change. They used the results. The Democratic Party chose not to. And then they had an interesting challenge because their caucus results were different than the primary. And I think as a result, I think you're going to see a different outcome on the Democratic side in 2020, which is great. That's great for the voters. Then when you look at regional primary, yes, I've been working with secretaries from across the West trying to get, I would love to see a Pacific Northwest regional primary.
Yeah.
Ideally, I think if you could do just 4 primaries, and then every 4 years a different part of the country gets to go first. I think that would be far more inclusive and get people to come here and campaign, not just raise money to our region. I don't know if we're going to be able to get that ever, because the parties I think might be resistant to it, but I think if we could get more Western states to go on the same date, you're going to see more candidates come here and campaign. As far as our regular primary, I think August is too late. I think this year definitely confirmed it. We had, you know, lower turnout than I was hoping to see. So I think moving the primary earlier in the cycle, and I've been saying this since we first started talking about moving the September date. You know, I've testified in front of committees, and I think they looked at me like I was smoking dope when I said, you know, what about May or June? But California and Oregon do May and June. And I grew up in California, and June works just fine. And in some ways, from a voter standpoint, it's kind of nice because you peak to that June primary, and then during the summer, the campaigns kind of go into a little bit down period, and then it picks back up after the Labor Day weekend. There's obviously some pretty big challenges to get the legislature to believe that, because you have the freeze and session, and those two things could bump up a little bit against that date, but it also might incentivize them to get done on time. So anyway, so yeah, I hope to have those discussions in the upcoming session too.
So what did you mean, you're a leader in voter registration? You said you started out. Is Washington State, what do you mean they're a leader in voter registration?
Well, just Washington State, I think some of the things that we've done, other states look to as a role model. So there is a thing called the Pew Performance Index, Election Performance Index. And I was on the work group that started that discussion too. And the idea was, let's start incentivizing states to do better things. Because we have some states like Washington that are doing online registration, they're doing vote by mail, they're doing these innovative things to engage voters. Let's try to incentivize other states to do it. So they picked 17 performance indicators, and these are academics and election professionals at the state and county level, and a whole cross-section of people. And our concern is if you create this, that it could be used politically. And certainly it has, because Washington went from a ranking of, I know we went down 8, I think we went from 12th to 20th overall. But what that really means is 8 states caught up with us. Our actual ranking stayed pretty much about 70-71%, and I'm really proud of that.
71% registered or something?
Of this ranking, there's 17 indicators. So yeah, but you can go in and look at voter registration, and you can compare states head to head on just that. And when you do that, we're in the top states. We're in the, I can't remember the ranking, but I want to say top 10, top 15.
Yeah, we got to share that vote by mail thing with others.
I know, absolutely. Well, we're trying. I think you're going to see states move into it, particularly after this cycle. I think you're going to. Yeah. California is right where Washington was, in the late 90s. Yeah. Quite honestly, they have so many people getting an absentee ballot that you get to a point where you just need to come.
No, our newspaper colleagues are all jealous of us. We get results on that. You don't have to sit there all night long waiting.
Yeah, we're done. Although you guys hate it because it still is a couple more days. We're working on that though.
It is, but it's it's much less than the days.
Thank you. You're the first reporter that said that to me.
What about the changing the the postmark date to
Excuse me, Susan.
Yes.
Beg my pardon.
No worries.
I have a doctorate.
No worries. That's more important. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
changing from postmark to actual
Yes, like Oregon, 8
physical
o'clock.
receipts,
Yeah.
so that we get returns.
I don't believe that you would get returns faster. It might be a day faster than it is right now, but I don't think it will be. You won't have them election night, because you still have to process everything that came in election night. My biggest concern with that is when you compare Oregon to Washington, Oregon's absentee law always was 8 o'clock. So their voters have always been used to an 8 o'clock cutoff. And what you see with voter behavior is it takes 4 years for voters to get it, because most voters only vote once a year, or once in that cycle, they vote in the presidential year. So are you willing to risk hundreds of thousands of votes for an arbitrary cutoff? Because that's what it's going to be. And now with how the Postal Service is changing their delivery time, you could put your ballot in the mailbox on Friday and it still may not get to the county auditor by 8 o'clock on Tuesday. So are you willing to have that ballot not counted because of something that the voter did right, but something out of their control? And when I say hundreds of thousands of votes, I can tell you how many ballots come in with valid postmarks, but come in after Election Day. So we get in the same number of ballots statewide on Wednesday that came in on Tuesday with valid postmarks. So that's a discussion. Are we willing to risk in a 4-year period a large number of disenfranchised voters to have an 8 o'clock cutoff? And you're still going to have to process those ballots. King County is still going to take days. The big counties are still going to take days. I am always going to err on the side of giving the voters the widest opportunity to be engaged. And I think that it's going to set up an expectation for voters and for the media that you're going to have results earlier, and I don't think you are. Oregon, Multnomah County goes 24 hours a day right around Election Day, and they're still not done Election night. So.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the problem we're trying to solve.
No, I would agree with that one. It's
Yeah.
typically for us, it isn't that many races.
It just
one
solves the
or two.
postmark date, though,
Yeah.
the issue that you brought up.
Well, it does, and then again, what problem are you trying to solve? If you're trying to make it so you can have the return postage, yes, but again, are you willing to disenfranchise those voters? And I guarantee you, everybody's going to be okay until their race gets close, and then all of a sudden that will matter.
Well, one last question, and you've done this a number of times, so I'll ask you to keep it brief. But
Sure.
we always ask you, if someone says, "Why would I vote for you?" What's the difference between you and voting for somebody else?
Yep.
What's your answer to that?
I think in this race you have a very, very clear choice. I am running on demonstrated experience, job-related experience, my leadership, and the integrity that I bring to the office. And one of the things I'm very proud of is the diverse endorsements that I have, not only of election professionals, so I have Democrats, Republicans, and independents from all 39 counties, former and current auditors and elections directors, secretaries of state, that type of thing. So the people that know elections, I've earned their trust and respect. But beyond that, you look at the endorsements of organizations. I've got a wide cross-section there too, from the WEA to the Association of Washington Business, the Seattle Times to the Walla Walla Union Bulletin. So it's a wide range because of the work that I've done, and it is about representing everyone, and it's not about partisan politics. And I think that when you look at just even the way this campaign has played out, I challenge you to look at my resume to my opponent's resume. And there's a lot of talk about technology background and all these things, but look at the actual 25 years. In 25 years, I've had 4 jobs that are directly related to the position I'm seeking. In that same period of time, my opponent hasn't held a position much longer than 4 years. So it is about consistently approaching this as a profession and approaching it as a professional job, not a political one. And when you look at my opponent's resume, it is about partisan activity. And I'm not saying I'm not political. I endorse some people. I do give money to candidates and that type of thing, but I don't come out on any issue because of the initiative and referendum part of the office. And when you look at that, those 2 resumes head to head, it speaks volumes, so I'll just leave it there. And then just the way the campaigns have been run. One last thing for the record, because I'm sure it got brought up and we just haven't had time to get to it. I am for the Voting Rights Act. I've got a packet, and I apologize, I would normally have one for all of you, but I decided I needed to be on time, not making copies at Kinko's, and so I have one I'll give to you. But one of the things my opponent has tried to paint me as is I'm against the Voting Rights Act. I've done nothing in 4 years to move it forward. It's simply not true. I've included copies of email. They'll show you that 2 weeks in, my staff and I were working with legislators to try to pass it. I was against the version in 2012 that was before the legislature, and that's a version that I will point out couldn't get passed out of a democratically controlled House, Senate, and governor's office. That bill had some structural problems that would have been difficult to draw new lines, for example, for district elections and be able to get ballots out on time. So we worked through those in 2013, and my approach to this bill has been one of really behind the scenes, because it's been a policy issue that the legislature, I thought, needed to work through. They're clearly at an impasse. So we've got a bill that we're going to be dropping in 17, and I think I'm the only candidate that can really bring both sides together to have those tough conversations. What is it that the Republicans object to? What is it that the Democratic Party really wants, and how can we find that compromise? Because we do need to give local jurisdictions that opportunity to change the way they do their elections. We saw it in Pasco. They could at least do it through the courts, but every jurisdiction, not just cities and towns, but PUD districts, county commissioners, all these junior taxing districts across the state should have that same opportunity to solve those problems at a local level.